So good afternoon. Welcome to Corny and Barrow Burgundy Unpicked podcast. It's a Domaine de la Romanée-Conti special, the one which I'm sure everyone's been waiting for, 10 to hooks, and comes off the back of our very active, busy week last week, launching the 2023 vintage. I'm joined, as always, with the illustrious Guy Seddon.
Oh, thank you, Joe. I don't think I've ever been described like that before. It's a pleasure.
And the spectacular Mr. Hargrave.
Yeah, I wonder what's happening there. Good afternoon, Joseph and Guy.
I knew nothing but compliments here, Will.
Indeed, the sincerity is overwhelming.
As always. So, DRC, as it's affectionately known as, Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, the jewel in the crown of Burgundy, considered by many, as Yoda might phrase it. So I thought, why don't we start with like a very, very brief sort of historical recap just on the Domaine? Because, I mean, obviously, it's one that has a lot of holdings. It can maybe cause a lot of confusion. The ownership, just to try and add a bit of clarity. Without going back too far, I mean, the name, obviously, Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, the vineyard, but there's an association with the Prince of Conti back in 1760 who purchased it at the time. And, you know, what he didn't know was going to happen was the French Revolution, obviously, which then confiscated it in 1790, 1791.
Events, dear boy, events.
Events, yeah, exactly. Hindsight. And unlike a lot of the estates that actually stayed as national property for a while, and that's when the current family sort of connection comes in with Jacques-Marie Duval-Blochet, comes in and buys it in 1869. Then, you know, there's a lot of money associated with running an estate, and that's when the Loirs come in. So Henri Loire in 1942 becomes a shareholder and co-owner, and that sort of connection is obviously, as we know, running through till today. Aubert de Villaine, who I think many consider, the most integral figure, and that is alongside obviously La Louise Loire because she played a very significant part. He started at the Domaine in 1965. Which is I didn't know that, but at the time we did a dinner at the Cutty Sark many years ago where
many
blind with 65 Conti.
Yes.
That was obviously his first vintage that he was involved with, which is very cool. But then officially sort of co-director from 1974 onwards with Lalou. And as we know, Lalou B's sort of parted ways, and that was in 1992 when Henri Frederick Roch came in and became the co-director alongside Aubert de Villaine. And that sort of relationship, very happy for quite a while. Sadly, Henri Frederick Roch passed away in 2018. And that's when his cousin, Perrine Fennell, came in 2019 and became the co-director from then. And as we know, Aubert de Villaine, he stepped down from the director role at the Domaine in 2021 when Bertrand de Villaine, his nephew, took over, which sort of brings us up to modern day. So that's the sort of the people behind the Domaine over quite a long snapshot. But each of them, if they hadn't have played their role, wouldn't be what it is today. Some possibly, well, not possibly, some definitely, obviously more vital than others. So let's just get stuck into it. It's obviously 2023, we're always a year behind with DRC. Do you want to start off? Because we obviously tasted, first of all, in November last year, yourself, Adam and I, and it was a brilliant tasting followed by a really nice lunch afterwards.
Yeah, it was indeed. It was. Well, Joe, that was a brilliant 300 years in 30 seconds. Congratulations. No, that's all great. As you say, we tasted at the Domaine on the 27th of November last year. So we always go down, or we sometimes are lucky enough to go down at that time of year. And it tends to be sort of as autumn is giving way to winter. And so you're tasting in the Domaine's cellars, which are actually not as freezing cold as some in Burgundy. So, you know, they feel nicely proportioned and a very sort of welcoming place to taste. But nonetheless, it is very atmospheric down there. And we were lucky enough to go down there and taste the 2023 vintage from bottle. So unlike those who listen to our podcasts or have been listening recently, we've been talking mostly about the 24 vintage. Of late, we're now rewinding a year, and as Domaine de la Romanée-Conti always release their wines from bottle rather than from barrel, we are talking about the 23 vintage. So we're, in a nutshell, sort of in the realm of a warm summer and a generous crop, and 22 and 23, two very happy vintages, which will be seen as a pair, I think, in many ways. And that's before we get into the 24 vintage, which was a total total reversal of fortunes, I suppose.
Mm.
So in terms of our tasting, we were there at the Domaine in late November. We started, so you're faced with an array of all of the wines of the Domaine. It's up to you where you start. So, we mostly, I started with Duval Blanchet, which is the Premier Cru selected from various parcels throughout Romanée, and not made every year. But for me, that was the logical place to start. I think maybe one or two of my tasting companions started with the Corton.
I like to group it by village, I'm afraid, Guy.
Yeah, no, so that is also very valid. So obviously the Corton has been made by the Domaine since the 2009 vintage.
Yeah.
And so 23 is now with several vintages under its belt. It is the geographic outlier, as you say, Joe, at the sort of northern end of the Côte de Beaune. So we worked our way through the wines, and we taste in studious silence, which I always like. Every now and then you'll hear somebody sort of exclaiming under their breath or making a quiet sort of comment to themselves, but generally, the tasting is very silent. We work our way through, and then at some stage, I think it was Bertrand and who else was pouring? I can't remember, but they came round and poured the.
Alexandre, maybe?
No, Alexandre wasn't there.
It was just Perrine.
Was it Perrine as well? So anyway,
someone breaks the silence.
Someone breaks the silence and pours the two white wines as well, and then you can either go back and retaste through the reds, or you can move on to the whites, and then we have a little chance to collect our thoughts, and we have a little discussion, which it's always a lovely format.
It is very, very cool. It feels particularly special. I mean, for me, the excitement ramps up because when you go down to where their cellar's located in Beaune, you've actually got the sort of the 23s and some of the 22s, which obviously have started being bottled, or they're pre-labeling with the 22s, and you've just got these racks and racks of wines that greet you, and you're like, oh my word, this is like treasure trove. Because you sort of walk past and you have a look, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's Echezeaux and there's RSV, and obviously they've got quite a large holding there, and it just materializes in front of these in front of you as it goes down the depth of the cave. But you sort of work your way through those to the back where we do this tasting, and but I think what really makes it even more special is I'm pretty certain this is correct, caveat, but we're the only partner that does this with them, as in a primeur tasting and at their estate. And the reason I say that is because, well, they've said this, and I think they enjoy as much as we do being able to then converse, give our thoughts and first impressions, and it just turns into this really lovely sort of conversational, analytical, but obviously driven by your first impressions from an emotional point of view, from sort of the a romantic point of view based on the vintage and what you've expected. And obviously these wines are the shining jewels for a reason, because they show their personalities brilliantly, but then obviously the vintage then has its part to play. And I guess they want to sort of feel, how do you think those two are combining? How are they matching up in this year?
It's also almost the perfect number of wines to taste.
Yeah.
Sort of eight reds, two whites. Yeah. There's a sort of real, you have all of you have a sort of framework to work within from that amount of wines. It's not so many wines that you're exhausted. It's not so few that you don't really have a reference or a sort of guide. But yeah, no, it's something that's fascinating.
But having that backwards and forwards, I mean, it definitely allows us to get the complete picture, doesn't it? Because it's not just, obviously I think they want to hear what we've got to say first, but then we love hearing what Perrine and Bertrand have to say. And I think in 23, there's a couple of occasions where they were sort of slightly polar in what their sort of viewpoints were on particular vineyards as well, which is brilliant because, we're all different people picking up on different sort of characteristics within the wines. And we've all got our sort of, our impressions or preconceptions a little bit more blind because they've been tasting throughout the year. But it's nice to hear their viewpoint because things may have changed, and Perrine will pick up on something where there was one note where she chimed in with a particular sort of mineral trait on one of the wines where it was spot on, and it was to do with, I can't remember which one it was now, but it'll be in my notes, so I'll have a look. And it's that sort of backwards and forwards that allows us then to come away, really get a good idea. We then are fortunate enough to then obviously taste again once they come over in February when we come to launch, which probably just brings us a little bit onto last week.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I would say on the tasting is that these are wines which are so renowned, and the vineyards have such marked personalities. So you're really discussing sort of the interplay of the personality of the site versus, or not versus, but as seen through the lens of the vintage. And that is what makes it such a joy. You're not talking about sort of analytics and figures. You're just talking about how these wines have portrayed themselves, or have been portrayed in the lens of a certain vintage. And it makes it a real journey of discovery.
Yeah, indeed.
So, I mean, if we look through the wines, if we go red then white, as you would taste there, as you mentioned, so often people pair them up. Now, with the Corton and the Duval Brochet aren't really a pair for all the reasons you've just mentioned.
Yeah.
But I thought from tasting, and it'd be interesting to get your views on how they differed from when you tasted in November to tasting beginning of last week. I think the Corton continues to go from strength to strength. To only really start in 2009. And I think 9, 10, obviously famous vintages, but they were getting used to it. And so I think in many ways there are a few steps when the quality's improved, but the personality comes through more now.
Yeah. I think that the immediate sort of upfront hits that you get with Corton is this sense of ripeness and of sort of quite dark, intense fruit. But the more you look at it, the more you see this real minerality of Corton. And that sort of the thing that the Hill of Corton does so well is this very intense kind of chalky, detailed minerality. And for me, that's kind of the stamp of the vineyard coming through. And that's what I enjoy.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's got its DRC element of charm and seduction and allure, which is exactly what you said. And I got that in my notes. And then that mineral, I mean, my final, I marked it's mineral definition, but with charm, and it's a bit of a siren this year. And it felt to me that, when I first got my nose in the glass and tasted, there was this lovely sort of obviously richness of fruit that comes from 23, but with that sort of whole bunch, exotic, really seductive charm that's there. But then that sort of tapers down. And then, as you said, Corton comes through and it just bursts through in its unapologetic fashion, which is what you want.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then whether you've done Vin Romanée Duval Brochet first or after, the Vin Romanée is kind of so cheerful. I mean, that sounds like a flippant kind of phrase to use, but it's bright. It's kind of the most red fruited maybe of all the wines.
Yeah,
it has changed, as you alluded to, Guy. It has changed over time because it's all Grand Cru fruit from the other holdings in Vin Romanée that are selectively, because of the replantings or whatever, that are selectively put into it. And I think it's been made every year now since 17 was the last year there wasn't one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a sort of 4 years out of 5 seemingly, but that doesn't mean to say it'll always be like that.
Yeah.
And what did you think of it?
I thought it was lovely. I mean, it has this sort of kaleidoscopic kind of dried herb, sort of sappy, soaring spice to the nose, which makes it a very extrovert style of wine aromatically. And then the palate is just sort of very fine and very, very tapering, and sort of has a long, very perfumed finish. It's a wine that sort of effortlessly exists in the air, which is not always the case with all wines. In terms of where it comes from, it does vary, as you said, from year to year. And I think there was mention of there being a little less La Tâche in it this year versus other years. I think one of the latest plantings of La Tâche was from 98, so those vines are obviously getting older now. And the Echezeaux and Grand Echezeaux, I think, plantings from the sort of 17, 18 and 19 years do make their way into the Vin Romanée.
And I think it's worth us mentioning that this is a cuvée that for the last 4 vintages or so and carrying on is designated as sold in bottle, so around about this time next year, but to on-trade, to restaurants and hotels, so that it's a sort of a calling card in a way to the Domaine's wines. But then we go on to Echezeaux and Grand Echezeaux, which being slightly the old fart of the group here, Echezeaux was very much the first wine you tasted when I joined CMB. So because there wasn't a Corton yet, and the Vin Romanée, they hadn't sort of thought of doing that as an entry point. So I mean, Echezeaux and Grand Echezeaux, obviously because their names often compared. And I think I found them as sort of as I would have expected in a way, in that Echezeaux is kind of more open, Grand Echezeaux maybe a little bit more clenched, I'm a big Grand Echezot fan generally, but I think the personalities were sort of introvert extrovert a little bit with Echezot being more extrovert. But what did you?
I mean, overall, I found the quality between the two of them from, a pure judgment point of view, very minimal. I actually really thought Echezot, and we've commented about this before, it seems to be getting bigger with more vine age. And obviously that kind of logically makes sense with, further density of fruit, etc., as it sort of goes through those bigger sort of 5-year jumps as it goes down vintage to vintage. But with 2023, and Guy, you might want to sort of say, I know when we sat down afterwards for dinner that night, we sort of, Adam went, right, what 3 words are you describing the vintage as?
And this is classic.
Yeah, it really is. And so, I'm happy to say mine. Maybe you think on yours and give it at the end of the pod.
Yeah, I'll give you the definitive ones at the end.
The right answer.
But, mine were rich, determined, and terrestrial. And so this is, for me, this vintage, from my own take, is this is a big vintage for DRC, and big I don't just mean in terms of crop. Yeah, the crop is there's a generous yield like it was last year. Not much different from 2022.
Yeah,
but big in terms of the structure, in terms of the wines. As a general rule, there is a real richness there, which comes in textures, comes in different sort of shapes as well. And there are serious terrestrial elements here where I'd sometimes don't normally get them. And the reason I brought it up is because of Echezot, I just underlined the palate has a real anchoring in the earth. It feels like, for Eches, normally that, quite often I'm all about that sort of floral and flamboyance, and it's got a cheeky side to it, but it had a more heady aromatics for me, and then was a real sort of deep mineral presence. Whilst Grenache, which is always the case, there's a more sort of atmospheric perfume, really does seduce. That carried on as it sort of kind of normally does. And I just wrote there that it was all about the structure here, that big structure, but it was just saturated in fruit. And then you just had these layers of spices that just weave into it. And that's very much Grand Echezot. So I guess where I'm going is Echezot was, a bigger brother of what it normally is. And Grand Ech kind of hit the bat exactly how I'd expect it. But ultimately not that big a difference in quality from my point of view. Do you remember what your 3 words were?
I was just trying to jot them down. I think I roughly remember what they were. But I mean, the 3 words I've just written down were elemental.
You did say that.
Brooding. And visceral. Now, I mean, you could split hairs and say that elemental and visceral are pretty similar. But I think what I mean by that is that there is this kind of quite stark, quite sort of no frills, essential character of the vintage and the wines. And they showed in a way in November that wasn't necessarily, I mean, it's certainly not as you would expect them to show in bottle in 10 years, 20 years time, but there was a rawness to them, and there was a sort of visceral kind of no makeup kind of persona that they all had. It wasn't necessarily the easiest tasting I've had at the Domaine.
No, it wasn't.
I think it was a challenging tasting. I have no doubt that these are going to be great, great wines, and the quality is absolutely not in question. But I think in terms of their stage of evolution and the actual tasting process, it required a bit of work.
Yeah.
And I think that's why this idea of sort of elemental or visceral really came through for me.
Yeah, because I think, compared to 22s, which had maybe a little bit more of a even more playful side to the fruit than 23 did for DRC, this is. And that balance of sort of brilliant freshness sort of elevated the aromatic presence that DRC gives with its winemaking. Where in 23, going back to like the elemental, I thought that was a great word. I would have loved to have stolen it because you got it before me at the dinner, and again, that sort of mineral, that anchoring, that richness, it's definitely plays a role in 23, which then sort of kind of distracts from the fruit and gives you this sort of other almost intellectual curveball to sort of think about. And actually these wines are not how I was expecting them to be, and how they're going to sort of evolve over time, like you said, is they're going to be very different, and it'll be a lot of fun to see.
Yeah. So, Will, what's the correct answer then?
Well, no, I've sort of had 4 so far. I've got a current 3, but we'll wait till the end.
Yeah.
So with Esch and Grand Esch for you, because also, I mean, let's remember, Echezeaux's vineyards are older than Grand Echezeaux, and I think that's what the point. Like, as they're getting into that sort of 35 or 36 years of age with Echezeaux now, they're really taking on some more deeper.
I always think. I mean, I almost always think that I would like to own Echezeaux until the wines are sort of 8 to 12 years old, and after that, I'd like to own Grand Echezeaux, which is a cop out. I realise.
I think one of the things that you sort of quite often hear wine lovers say is, "Oh, well, there's a big step up from the Domaine's Echezeaux to their Grand Echezeaux," and I think maybe in the past that's been the case. But I actually think on this tasting, and actually we managed to taste them this time as well. So we've seen it twice, but the difference between the two wines was the smallest I've ever seen. And in fact, my initial tasting, my sort of range of scores put Echezeaux potentially slightly ahead of Grand Echezeaux, which I don't think I've ever done before.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we better get on to and we're going to have to own up to having had a dinner the night before the tasting here, because we do a dinner most years, and we try to rotate who we can ask to that, because we'd love to have absolutely hundreds of people, but that just wouldn't work. So Richebourg and RSV, or RSV and Richebourg, is probably the way to look at them. We had the 91 side by side and the 16 side by side the night before, but having tasted them, I think this is a year in which the wines, again, a bit like Echezeaux and Grand Echezeaux, I wouldn't split the quality massively, but I think it's a year with that richness and brooding character when, to my mind, the vintage plays to Richebourg's strengths.
Yeah.
A little more than RSV. And I am normally ever so slightly the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think we also saw that slightly with the 91, because it's a little bit of an unfair fight, 16. Those two in 91 in terms of the plantings at the time, etc. But in the 16s, we saw that.
Yeah.
And I just love these two as a pair, because it's sort of extrovert daughter versus his sort of slightly bigger brother.
It's real yin and yang, isn't it? I mean, they've got elements which are almost diametrically opposed to the other one. And so, Richebourg is the big bruiser. I mean, I think, as Adam's probably said in the past, you would want Richebourg on your side in a fight. And on the other hand, Romanée-Saint-Vivant is so soaringly pretty, and it's sort of an archetype of Vin Romanée. If you had to show somebody sort of an absolute textbook example of a Vin Romanée, it would be Romanée-Saint-Vivant. So, they go hand in hand very nicely.
Yeah, and I think this is, the dinner, the main reason was because of that. I mean, that was a special piece of land, just obviously right next to the Domaine, where you've got Romanée-Saint-Vivant that goes into Richebourg, and next door is Romanée-Conti, and further down is La Tâche. I mean, they're all sort of, borders are just what separate them, but it's all the soil differences are extraordinary. And I remember looking into, before we're looking at the talking about the Richebourg and Romanée-Saint-Vivant, even the subsoils, there's sort of 70 centimeters difference between Romanée-Saint-Vivant and Rich, and I think that really sort of plays its massive part in drainage and ultimately in texture within the wines. I really liked RSV. I found it quite red fruited. It was the one that all of this was quite dark fruited as a vintage, and Romanée-Saint-Vivant, my notes were sort of on the red fruit and floral, and like you said, that sort of lavender and sort of peony character. But it was there was a sort of satin-like presence there. But I just thought it was a really well controlled but quite determined RSV. So the nose and palate may be slightly contradictory, and see how in time that maybe sort of finds its feet and combines together. But Richebourg, with what you said, it was actually, I wrote here that there's a real cool feel to the dark fruit, and that was what surprised me the most, because obviously 23, soaring temperatures, crazy heat, hotter than 03 at points. Yet there was a coolness to the fruit, and obviously this is testament to the team, to working the vineyards, but how they make the wines. And I just said the texture and weight is an extraordinary balance, and there was just this flow that was sort of next level. I wrote master and commander and underlined it. I don't really know what that means, but I like the sound of it at the time.
I think it was a series, wasn't it? On the telly?
Planning your sort of viewing.
Charge! Yes, exactly. But no, I know, a cracking pair of wines.
I mean, could you maybe say that Richebourg, to your point, has kind of taken the seasons abundance and run with it, because that's what you expect from Richebourg's character, whereas RSV has managed to retain that kind of floral finesse despite the excesses of heat in the season.
Yeah, because you might expect exactly that to dominate.
Yes.
And it doesn't appear to have done. And as you're right. I think maybe it's all the more impressive in a vintage like that RSV is as good as it is.
Yeah.
When it does play to the strengths of Richebourg slightly more in terms of what you might find.
Yeah.
But I mean, that brings us on to La Tâche. And
exactly. Going a little bit further south, just in, as we said, to the neighbouring vineyards, Tâche. And for me, this was the one where when we said it was quite a difficult tasting at times, La Tâche confused me the most.
I agree with that. I agree.
And it leapt out of the glass, and you thought, right, we're in for a La Tâche masterclass here. This is going to smother me in everything that I want in terms of elegance and finesse and detail, and that felt there. But then onto the palate, there was clearly a lot of threads and like this tapestry coming together and a huge length. But it felt like it was very much in a transitional phase, and so I couldn't work out. And then Adam said, which I've scribbled in my I'll use his term, scribbled in the column. He said
in the margins.
In the margins, sorry, scribbled in the margins. It's got a slight ill at ease feel about it right now, like it's still trying to work out where it's going, and that may have just been, of course, And I do think it was a bit more of a phase thing in November, because it didn't have that necessarily when we tasted it last week, when it was bottled.
Yeah, I felt in November it was a little bit monolithic and it was quite hard to get inside.
Yeah.
So it sort of confronted you with a kind of wall of power and sort of potential, but you couldn't really see the nuances. So, you need to find a way into wines in order to sort of see what's beneath the surface, or what sort of...
normally it just begs to be drunk.
Yes.
It's just kind of like, right, I'm going to drink this sample and then I'll do my work in a minute when I taste the next one.
But it was
it's just so delicious.
It was so exuberant, so overwhelming. It was almost kind of too much, I think, in November. And I'm sure, as you say, that was a phase thing, and it was just the stage it was at in its evolution. It's clearly going to be a very, very good wine, but it just wasn't that easy to read.
Yeah. These are going to be top tier vintage.
And was Romanée-Conti, when you tasted back in November, as insanely good as it? I mean, I can't ever remember it. It's so often not in the shadow of La Tâche, but sort of shyer than La Tâche.
Yeah.
And coiled up and giving away less on the day. But I mean, it was just so good.
Interestingly, it's paler than La Tâche, isn't it, Romanée-Conti? And it just has this kind of sense of ease and airiness and kind of space. I think it's the absolute sort of best example that you could possibly see of a wine that just kind of soars off into the air, and it's kind of more aroma than it is liquid. And I think, Romanée-Conti does this better than any wine I've ever seen. And it did actually do this amazingly well when we tasted it in November. Yeah. And that sort of disjointed thing that maybe La Tâche had a little bit was not present at all in Romanée-Conti. Now, I mean, again, that's the sort of luck of the evolution and where we managed to sort of taste it at, but it was just sublime.
It is stunning. I mean, I concur with everything you just said. I scored it 19.5 plus. The last time we had a Romanée-Conti probably of this level so early was 2015, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm just looking at Adams. I knew he'd given it 19.5 to 20, and I can't actually remember the last time he managed to get a 20 into a note.
2015 was 20.
Well, he said here, this magical Romanée-Conti, one of the very great, shadowing in youth, even the 2020.
Yeah, well, so I mean, I love 2020.
But I mean, it was just... perfection is a sort of silly concept in wine, really. But there's nothing about it you would change. So... arguably, that sort of makes it it's in that stratosphere.
I mean, I would like to take this opportunity to say, and it's through obviously fortune of my living and being a Cornier Barrow, but I've managed to have quite a few glasses of Romanée-Conti over the years. It is the most special piece of land in Burgundy, without doubt. It is the greatest Grand Cru, and it is all about. And I think it showed it in November, and it showed it in this tasting. And what you were saying, Guy, people obviously always talk about the ethereal nature of Romanée-Conti, but it's that weightless sensation that it has for Pinot whilst clearly still having stuffing, but it's just so brilliantly shown. And that's what, and in here, I just said, the beauty here is the feel of the tannins and the way it seamlessly knits to the cool fruit with perfectly gauged freshness that connects the harmony of the fruit, the intensity of the tannins and the feel, close to perfection. And I wrote, it's Romanée-Conti style, but pumped up a notch. Like it is incredible. It's that its personality is pure and almost perfect in 23.
Yeah. Bravo.
Well, should we talk about some white wines?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Courton Charlemagne. So
fifth vintage?
No, so we had 19, 20, 20. Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it is the fifth.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's come around quick.
It has come around quick, yeah. I instantly wanted to say no. I was like, it's still on the second, isn't it? But
there's a nice symmetry to 09 being the first Courton red and 19 being the first Courton Charlemagne. So
that is true.
10 years apart. And, this is from the three different tiers, I suppose you would say, of the hill, leased from Domaine Bonnet de Martre. And, my first route into the Courton Charlemagne is that it does give you that same sort of chalky mineral translation of the hill of Courton, but seen through the lens of a different grape. So, this is that same expression in a sense, but seen through Chardonnay rather than Pinot Noir. And that's rather amazing to be able to see a similar character through.
I mean, also, would you say, and I'm not talking just about the Domaine here, but that Courton Charlemagne and Montrachet are arguably the two most different white Grand Crus?
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Because you have what you're aiming for in a way with Montrachet is hedonism, and you could Mazzini white, but that's a little bit is hedonistic, controlled hedonism sort of thing with Montrachet.
Yeah.
Whereas Courton Charlemagne, as is often said, it's about the light, but it's more of a sort of laser-like wine.
Yes, that's true.
But I struggle to really pick a favorite in a funny sort of way. I think there are times, and I mean, God, not something I'm going to have to worry about, fortunately, but there are times you would want one and times you would want the other, actually.
I think, for people, it's good to sort of, because I'm assuming a lot of people, because a lot of people listen to this, clearly, but quite a few people may have not even had their first Courton Charlemagne from 19 yet. So to give you a sort of an idea on the style versus other Courton Charlemagnes, because very often I will associate Courton Charlemagne just being a lot of precision and tension being at center stage. Obviously, it's all about that white marl within the hill, and so it gives that real sort of saline, savory aspect. That is there, but their style is a richer style of Courton Charlemagne. They apply the same philosophy that they do with Montrachet. I remember, we've had it before with Thibaut Jacquet, thank you, at Bonnet de Martre, who sort of said, there's quite a significant difference between picking times, and that plays its part because there is a richness in the 23. You're going to get that anyway because of the vintage style with its warmth and it's the phenolic development it would have had, and that comes through. And there is a very sort of broad profile, but this one is probably the most mineral driven, I think, now as well, since they've started. So 19, and again with Courton, it's very lazy, and I don't think it's a good thing just to say, with the Courton, they sort of had DRC style there, and then they found their feet, and then the terroir sort of started to come through year by year in a much more obvious way. But it's a logical sort of assumption to sort of make. But in 23, I very much enjoyed it. I prefer the 22 versus the 23 Courton Charlemagne myself.
It was very, very complex, though. I mean, the number of sort of adjectives, just looking at my tasting that I seem to have used. I won't sort of embarrass myself by reading them all out, but or bore you rather. But it's clearly a very complex wine with a lot of stuff going on, and there's a sort of citric side to it, there's a mineral side to it, there's a sort of denser stone fruit side to it, and it does have that richness of the DRC style, but again, it sort of lets that chalkiness of the hill of Courton through. So I mean, there's so much going on.
Yeah, what I like about the 23 though is it is more, if you like DRC Montrachet, the style of how they produce that wine, and I know it's gone through a little bit of a change over the decades, which we can talk about in another pod. I think you'll like 23 Courton Charlemagne one hell of a lot. I mean, I did, and the personality is different, where 22 may be sort of a slightly more toned in. And I guess I always had at the back of my mind 22 Montrachet, which I absolutely, I wanted to die for last year.
So
it's a tough act to follow.
I think we probably talked about that on the pod last year, but it was one of the nicest tasting moments I think we've ever had. It was almost overwhelmingly poetic, I think, wasn't it, for you, from your perspective anyway?
Yeah,
it's quite emotional.
There we go.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you do bring up a good point. That is, the Corton Charlemagne 19, much as people will think, borderline infanticide, it's brilliant to start drinking and to have your first bottle of that if you're lucky to get a 3-pack or something like that.
Yes. Yeah.
And I will at this point mention, obviously, the offer is out and it's something we heavily allocate, et cetera, but the drive here and the importance here is for corks to be pulled. And so I think that's why, as of last year, we brought in that people could have the wines delivered duty paid home, but if they were going to store them in bond, they had to stay with us. And it's just because we want to make sure these are going to the people who are going to drink them.
Did we want to sort of say anything on Montrachet more? Because I know we talked about Corton Charlemagne, but we didn't really.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah.
But I mean, very briefly for me, like the Montrachet, this is the old school style. I mean, I really liked 23 Montrachet. It was very tough to live up to sort of 22 in my eyes, and it's not far off because it is ripe, it is broad, it has got an unctuous sort of feel there. I loved it because I remember I sort of marked on the fruit being, it's almost, when fruit is perfectly ripe and you just pierce the skin and you get the sweetness, but that juice of like fresh acidity jumping as well. Yeah. It had that, but then it had energy at the core, and I loved that. And so I think it's going to be, which can once you guys have had your comments, ties onto the Montrachet 03, which I'd like to talk about from the dinner we did last week.
Yeah. I mean, may as well get a few more people to hate us, but I mean, it was stellar, absolutely stellar, and I think it does just go to show, and it's something Adam said over the years. The vineyard wins out over the vintage eventually, and 03, I think, has been proven actually to be an incredibly good and incredibly interesting vintage in most places where you've got people who know what they're doing with their land and they've actually not been completely phased by the craziness of it at the time. And it was just, I mean, it was almost worth just keeping the wine in your glass to smell. You didn't really need to drink a great deal of it.
Yeah. I mean, to call it sort of joyful and happy as a wine is underselling it big time. But I mean, if you compare the Corton Charlemagne, which is a white fruit spectrum, very clipped, very focused, very much about the minerality, and then the Montrachet is like sort of a golden, sort of glowing with internal energy, and there's just something that reverberates with kind of life in the Montrachet. It's a really wonderful wine.
Yeah, awesome. The 03 Montrachet was spectacular. I mean, we chose the 03. I think there's a lot of curiosity around it. We've got a connection for someone in-house who absolutely loves that vintage, which carries favour. But also, when you think about a huge warm vintage, people sometimes think that, they're going to be fragile as they age. And that is the complete shining example of dispel that theory in your head, because it was packed with evolved reductive character. So what I mean by that is that sort of mineral essence of the wine kind of brought that to the forefront of it, and that comes up in those classic terms of popcorn and white sesame and toffee, and I loved it. But it was just there was so much precision for what you expected. So if you have Montrachet 2003 in your cellar, you're in for a treat. Pull the corks. If you don't, good luck finding it. But get in touch. We can maybe try. We've had requests as dinner. But to your question, okay, so I think it's good to sort of maybe round off on vintages are drinking now. Great Pinots and great Chardonnays, they can be open in youth because they've got a lot of quality to show in their sort of early stages. Then the vintage character, depending on the growing season and the style of the wine, it may shut down, which quite often does, but some of them stay open for the entirety. And actually getting your cellar with a mixture of both, that's the trick. That's the secret. You want ones that are going to stay open, you can enjoy throughout its life.
Okay, so if you had to pick a vintage that was
so young and open now,
late 2000 and teens, around 2009, 10, and then nearer 2000.
Okay, so going from youngest, I would say, and I've had this through my experience recently, 2018s. 2018 DRCs are actually brilliant now. And I think it's because they're still in the phase of the vintage is showing its stamp a little bit more than the wine. Yeah. So they're starting to show its sort of terroir trait, but the fruit is sumptuous, ripe, juicy. And then obviously Riche, for example, a little bit more spicier and a broader tash about the finesse and texture. So you'd see that. 19s, I think, are...
No, you're only allowed one.
Oh,
it's
right,
18.
Okay. Oh, sorry, okay.
So
18.
then one back to around about the sort of between 2008 and 2012.
2011.
Okay.
I'm going to say that, which is going to be... most people are going to guffaw. What? 11? Rot vintage? Why would you even look at that? 11s were the example of DRC that shut down and did for a long time. And this is the reason I'm saying this is because it will surprise you. It's now got to a place where it's put on weight, the texture has changed, the fruit has opened, where before it was a slight green sheen to it, but it's actually now giving a lot of joy and a lot more character.
Okay.
And then and what was the other one around?
Sort of back towards 2000. You can't have 99.
No, I'm not going to say this because they're not really ready. You need to keep the... I mean, if you've got plenty of bottles, open one for the fun of it, but if you've only got one, no. Oh, I'm gonna have to say it's a bit dull because I was torn between 2000 and 2002. I'm going to say 2002. And that's purely because last year, one of my best wines I had was the Tash 2002 in March. This bottle was just spectacular. It was absolutely everything you wanted from the Tash.
Okay.
You guys?
Well, I mean, Joe drinks more DRC than the rest of us combined, I think. So, but with the possible exception of you, Mr. Hargrove. But the 09s, I think, for me, are drinking beautifully. And we were lucky enough to taste a few of them alongside each other about a year ago, I think it was. And I thought they were in a really, really lovely place. So I think that's probably a vintage that I would single out, which, there's this great debate about 09 versus 10. And, are you more of a sort of classicist, which the 10s would suggest, or do you like a bit more of that sort of flesh and the sort of opulence of the 09s? And I think the 09s are actually defying that sort of that character of opulence, and they're actually showing a lot of elegance, and they're going to be beautiful wines, and they are very enjoyable right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I think the 04s are a massive over deliverer on what people will expect and on what you might read, and I just think they're very, very good wines. An 08 and 11, I agree with you on. I mean, I've not had many 18s, so I can't really talk on that one too much. But the 17s, which were my vintage to talk about, I think are a little bit shut, and maybe they're doing an 11 thing a little bit. But I mean, nice problems to have. But
so two more just to throw in just for listeners. One is still not to approach, and that's 2006. I do think that will come good, but it's still not ready. So
still dense.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a density and there's just a real shy and quite angular character about it at the moment.
Yeah.
But the one which I predict for 2026 is going to come into the limelight, and this is where I'll probably get shot down in totally incorrect. I've had a couple of 12s over the last 2 months, and they've always been very pure, small, brilliant, fresh, but a little bit, again, tight and taut. Clenched, lovely word. And actually, they've now feel that they're getting into a slightly different phase because, again, texture's coming through and actually a much more aromatic. The aromatic character was there in terms of florality, but the fruit was never really that sort of displayed. I think 12s are going to open up over this year. So I would look at jumping into.
So I suddenly realised I haven't done my 3 words.
I was going to remind you. So.
Yeah, good. I've gone with, and one of them's a bit of an outlier to the other two, but succulent, poised, and military. There's a sort of correctness about them in a funny sort of way.
Goes back to my Master and Commander.
Yeah,
I planted that seed in there, yeah.
But anyway, well, as we round off, I also want it noted that you tasted the Domaine 2 days before my 50th birthday, and I still didn't get an invite. But there we go.
Oh,
no.
Well, we did raise
I'm not remotely. That's very kind. I'm not remotely bitter about it at all. Anyway, well, I think we're done for DRC 23.
Yeah. Time to sell. Get in touch with your orders. As the time of recording this, the offer is open. And it will be shutting next week on the 17th. Tuesday the 17th.
And it was a very nice way of sort of inaugurating our newly refurbished offices as well.
With our first pod from the new... From the club room. Yeah, so, and the events.
Do come and see us if you're within reach of E1.
I quite enjoy this club room. Yeah, nice little...
Anyway, over and out from me.
Yeah, goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thanks.